It feels just like starting over. Good morning, ladies. As the class looked down from their seats, expressions differed from worry to cautious expectation. Dalala sat alone, her eyes anywhere else. Tom cleared his throat. February of 1906 saw the launch of HMS Dreadnought. It was a new type of battleship, and it began an escalation of the technology of warfare that would last for decades. Fingers flew over omnipads as the girls bent to their notes in a familiar routine. You don't need to take notes today. Just hear me out. Everyone looked up at the break from the class routine. Even adapting to Socratic learning, the girls found ways to fall back on what they knew. Scifi didn't seem quite able to let go of her pad, and he gave her a gentle nod. The following month saw the first Battle of Bad Dajo. It was a moment in the Moro Rebellion, although calling it a battle was a misnomer. A few hundred Moro people who went to farm in the region were assaulted by US forces. Of the hundreds of men, women, and children, there were only 6 survivors. The girls looked upset, and he waited a moment. As you can imagine, it was a lasting disaster to the relations between America and the Philippines that were still being called to mind before the Shulvanti landing. Tom drew a deep breath and looked to Miver for support. Their lesson plan had called for comparing imperial consolidation on Shil with the governments of the 20th century, but she'd given her time and her blessing to throwing out the script for today. She nodded his way and he pressed on. The end of 1906 saw the first radio broadcast, consisting of music, a poetry reading, and a speech. The year began with ambition and aggression, and ended with an invention that cried out to let humanity understand one another. Tom realized he'd been fiddling with his omnipad, and set it aside. Anyway, those events will not be on your exam. After speaking with Professor Palavon, we'll be using today to just talk. Tom saw Dalala shift uncomfortably, brushing back her short black hair. Her head was down, but he caught her eye as she looked up warily. So, it's been said that no act of force, no invader, can hold on to a population yearning to be free. That there are no greater powers than the need for freedom and the need to care for one another. At least, that was the idea. While the reality was beyond our grasp, humans believed it might be possible someday. And yes, I'll get to the point in a minute. Desi gave him a smile, and the butterflies in his stomach grew still. As far as advances, the Imperium has made that a reality, but not without its own crimes of violence and pride. Humans were still teaching ourselves that we needed our compassion more than our cleverness when the Imperium arrived. After that, well, we became citizens of the Imperium, and while most of humanity has accepted that, there are still some people who feel we're just slaves. Shulvanti were rabidly against slavery, and he knew the word stung. So yeah, we're going to get into why I reacted the other day, but to do that, we have to pick at the idea humans have about being free. Tom paused, scanning their faces a moment. Obviously, the Imperium has its reasons for how and why things happened, and it chose what may have seemed like a good idea at the time. Humans were free, while the Imperium thought we were being freed. Suddenly, we found out we were no longer alone, and no longer free to pretend we weren't. Tom could see Melondi out at the corner of his eye, but he glanced over at Kellock. She always paid attention when he went off on one of his tangents. Everybody has ideas and perspectives, so how do you tell a good idea from a bad one, when sometimes the worst ambitions look like the best of intentions? Freedom is more than the right to do whatever you want, whenever you want. Freedom means taking responsibility and living with the consequences of your actions. That's part of becoming an adult too. Another thing we're supposed to help you learn. Tom sighed and settled back on the desk. Which brings me to the lesson I taught you the other day, without meaning to. For all our hopes and plans, we all walk into the future blindfolded. Sometimes that means you run into things pretty hard. Just like you, humanity is coming of age. I expect you've noticed that it's not always easy. Tom smiled wearily, and got some tentative smiles in return. The Imperium has reminded humanity that we have to create our future, or others will do it for us. That's a good lesson for a person or a people. Tom didn't look for the cameras, but he wondered who was watching. Or even an Imperium. The question is, who we are and what is our future. I'd like to believe each of us has a responsibility to everything in our care, because if we don't care for one another, who will? He looked at Desi and Mel sitting together, the pauper and the princess. Personally, the arrival of the Imperium brought me a lot of pain, but while pain marks endings, it can also mark new beginnings. So, the floor is open, ladies. Who wants to start? Dalala sat and fidgeted in the office that Tom shared with Mivere, her arms crossed defensively. I'm not going to apologize. I haven't asked you for one. Tom settled into his chair. The Shorvanti desk was huge, but extra seat cushions let him meet her eye to eye. I'm here to teach you, and you're here so I can decide how to best go about that. All I've heard you teach is that the Imperium is bad. Dalala jutted her tusks defiantly. That nobles are bad. Then I think you've been hearing, but not listening. I'm here to teach you about humanity, and I'd offer that some of us haven't decided if the Imperium's made its case, which isn't the same thing. Tom canted his head, keeping his tone light. So, you think I have something against nobles, and you've grown up a noble. Do you believe that's all there is to it? Dalala narrowed her eyes. What? Are you trying to take me for a fool? Might be a fair trade. Tom choked off the thought. Stop it. Let's pass over that for a moment, he said simply. I want to tell you a story. Oh, goddess, another one? She rolled her eyes, slouching down in the chair. Yes, he snapped, slapping his palm on the desk in frustration, and Dalala recoiled. I may regret that later. Hopefully Jama was right about the uses of being a man, after all. So, a story. Tom studied her as she looked back warily. Once upon a time, there was a man named Ryokan, who lived a simple life at the foot of a mountain. One evening, a thief came to his hut only to discover Ryokan had nothing to steal. Ryokan discovered the thief and said, You've come a long way to see me, and shouldn't leave empty-handed. Why not take my clothes as a gift? The thief was bewildered, but took the clothes and slunk away. Ryokan was left there naked, watching the stars, and said, Poor fellow, I wish I could give him this beautiful moon. So, you're calling us thieves? Dalala muttered. No, I'm... Tom paused, pinching the bridge of his nose. Dalala always pushed, and it felt like his cool was framed at the edges. I'm saying what you value may not be the same for other people. Dalala looked away, her shoulders hunched briefly before she asked, Are you talking about Shorvanti and humans, or nobility and commoners? Who says it can't be both? The silence stretched and Tom waited. If I can get through to this girl, if I could get through to her and make her believe me, then maybe. But why would that be? Surely we all want the same things. Success, status, prestige, the respect of our peers? Maybe. Perhaps often. But how can you be certain I define success in the same way? My efforts in the classroom have been to teach all of my students how to look at things in new ways, because sometimes that has value. Dalala, you could be my greatest success, not because you agree with me, but because you learn to see things from a different perspective. Even a human one. A noble takes care of her debts and responsibilities, Dalala intoned quietly, glaring at the floor through her long ebony bangs. Another moment passed, and she gave a small sigh. Professor, My mother's raised me better than this. I do owe you an apology, and I am sorry. Not just about what I said, but about your family, too. I accept. Tom swallowed and picked his words carefully. So, it's really a case of how I'm going to teach you. Going forward, please try and remember that it's my role to ask questions. I don't promise they'll always be comfortable. If you don't have the answer, then what do you do? Ask you how to find it for myself. Brava, Mr. Sane, brava. Tom sat back in his chair in a pose he's seen Garnier use. You have a keen mind. You'll be well served by gathering all the pieces you can before drawing your conclusions. I'm sincerely here to help you. Dalala seemed to think about it. So, do you think I'm a fool? Now, that's a question only time can answer, he smiled. For what it's worth, only fools never doubt. Without a doubt, Clips was annoyed. It was early afternoon, and she'd been in Dr. Bradoon's truck for hours, listening to the ex-Marine ramble on. The seats were uncomfortable, and her burn had started to peel, leaving her shuffling in her seat, glowering at wisps of skin as they blew around the cabin. It was also fucking cold. Duktra liked the windows cracked, and despite temperatures into the 50s, the burn over Clip's body still felt like she was radiating heat. After grousing for a few miles, she huddled into her jacket and made the best of it. Where are we going exactly? You wouldn't believe me if I told you, Bradoon snorted, and snuggled down into her chair, letting the autopilot do the work while she fiddled with the radio. Empress tits. Can you believe this shit? A magistrate out in Herber's province is accused of rustling stray Turoks and selling them in the next province over. That sounds like something for the police. Clip scratched at her neck and umber skin wafted around the cabin like ash. Why would that be on an emergency service channel? Silly bitch got drunk and tore down a section of fence before barricading herself in a barn with a megaphone. Bradoon snorted in disgust. Now they've got 200 Turoks wandering over the roads, and they're calling for animal control. Idiots. We're going there? Fuck no, waste of time. And I spent enough time out in the boonies. Anyway, I said I'd make the other day up to you. You also threw a giant whatever the fuck through a drive-through window, Clip sulked, revising her odds of anything good coming from the trip sharply downward. Pouchadillo. Duktra pulled out her tote bag, drawing out a handful of false eyes. Would you believe some crazy bitches thought they made good pets? Imported enough to start a whole farm of the fuckers, before figuring out that nobody wanted their kids out walking a fuzzy armored reptile on a leash. A few idiots bought 'em, but when the pet company realized they were going bust, they just opened the cages and let them go. Clips thought about the furry horror in the cage Duktra thrust into her lap and paled. Just turn them loose like that. You got it. Duktra picked out a virulent red and orange eyeball, before buffing it on her shirt and staring at it critically. Customers love this one. What do you think? What? We're going to see one of your customers? I thought you said this would be something good. Ah, my goddess, just relax, Bradoon said blithely, before reaching over and slapping a patch on Clip's arm. There, just enjoy the ride, eh? What the fuck's this? Clip stared at the purple bandage, now adhered to her skin. Just leave it alone. That's the good stuff. Combat stim. Helps you heal a lot faster, you know. She settled back into her seat, nodding sagely. Those are 50 credits a pop on the lowdown, but I have a friend who keeps me connected. Clips poked at the patch experimentally, but it seemed to have sealed tight, and after a moment she had to admit she did feel better. So what's this client of yours all about? Just trust me. Remember how I told you a few idiots bought some... Nestha watched R'hllor poking around the apartment. Anyway, Prelatori is close to the academy. I'm here almost every other day when my professor cooks, and that's how I spotted this place. It's just lovely. It's airy and there's so much light. R'hllor spun around the empty room and peered into the kitchen. There's all kinds of space. It comes with the appliances and just needs furniture. Nestha followed him in, keeping a polite distance, even though she knew she was starting to grin. You like it? Oh, it's wonderful. I really do, he smiled, and her heart melted. Good. See, I was thinking, you can't stay in a hotel forever and it's close to the academy. R'hllor turned back and Nestha held up her hands, as R'hllor cocked his head. Just let me finish, please. I know you said... Well, you said you don't want to go back, so I thought... if Pris didn't mind, I could look after you here? R'hllor looked down at the floors, uncertain. You don't have to think of it as permanent. I know there's no commitment between us. I'm probably not the sort of girl you think of as a first choice. Probably not even a second or third. But I'll be here for you if you let me. Nestha took a small step closer. You haven't had a lot of choices, so this would all be up to you. You've been so kind. R'hllor smiled up at her then. Margaret would never have ever done anything this thoughtful for me. You won't have to worry at all. Margaret won't bother you again. R'hllor was still smiling, but he cocked his head curiously. What makes you say it like that? You sound so positive. Oh, it's just... You said you don't want to see her again, not after she... Nestha struggled, glancing at R'hllor's shoulder. She's here, but I've kept you away, so you won't have to face that kind of abuse again. I just want to make it all easier for you. R'hllor looked like he was in shock, and he held up his hand, stepping away. Nestha, you can't do that. She's here? How could you not tell me? But she hit you. Nestha watched R'hllor grow more upset by the moment, and it tore at her heart. I thought, you told me. I just want you to be safe. Do you think that was easy for me? I trusted you when I told you that. I at least wanted to talk to Pris. R'hllor shook his head in dismay. She's my wife. Those were private things, and you've turned them against me. You're taking away my choices, not giving them to me. R'hllor turned away, and Nestha sagged against the wall, mind reeling. Nice going, Nestha. You butted in, took over, pushing for what you wanted. Mephisti 2.0. Goddess, I'm just like my mother. When she looked up, R'hllor was already gone. As a rule, Kadira Sariva believed in the power of laughter. Without a sense of irony, there were times when the weight of her goals would have been too much to bear. Fortunately, working as the chief of security for Princess Kamordri had been a boon in all respects. With her gone, well, there was time for other diversions. You say you're in pest control? Kadira asked. Dr. Bradoon had been mentioned in some circles as a freelance killer for hire. Looking at the unlikely woman, she revised her value on those contacts appropriately. Oh yes, ma'am. Bradoon nodded gamely. No problem too big or small for me to get rid of. Delightful. You could say we're rather in the same line of work, she said without a hint of amusement. The red and orange eye in the contractor's head was sideways, and seemed to be slowly rolling backward in its socket. Marvelous. If there was any obvious use for Pradoon's companion, who'd introduced herself as Pavis Cosren but called me Clips, it currently escaped her. The dumpy woman's apparel was the only unremarkable thing about her, given she'd been burnt dark umber and was peeling like an overripe plover. That alone would have created a lasting impression, without the 3 stim patches plastered on her arms. She seemed to be having some sort of slow-motion meltdown, and ready to vibrate across the floor. And you're a freelance telejournalist, was it? Yes, ma'am, I am. I can get you some great shots. Cosreen was nodding up and down so fast that her head might detach, and Kadira stifled a laugh through hard necessity and cold steel. How fascinating. Kadira turned back to Pradoon. And you handle all lines of pest control? Oh, yeah. When you think of reptile attacks, look no further. And they said counter-torture techniques had limited uses. I see. Well, I think I have just the thing for you. As Chief of Security, I'm in charge of palace affairs while Princess Camordry is away. And as the public is aware, she's well renowned for her gardens. Kadira saw blissful incomprehension on the contractor's face, while her partner was stammering gently to herself. The princess made a well-meaning purchase of some Grillician pouchadillos, but they've gotten loose on the grounds. I'd like them removed. Permanently. Kadira generally tuned out the details after setting arrangements for the guns to be cleansed, her mind turning to more important matters. There were a lot of life lessons in the pair before her, none of them good. Kadira believed in her goal of eliminating the aristocracy. But if all commoners were all like this, it would have begged for a reassessment. Fortunately, she knew better, and she'd be able to file this away in her memory. A gift of laughter that would keep on giving. Alright, they're fools. Still, even fools have their uses. Some are useful just because they're fools. Simply marvelous. Kellark looked at the rest of the girls, holding her temper in check. Gombri Kittrell had been with her plans all the way, which would have been more comforting if she'd given her room to breathe. Tiny workroom or not, there never seemed to be 2 moments when she wasn't brushing up against her. That wasn't the worst of it, but it wasn't helping her nerves. Goddess, these women were supposed to be the video blog staff. Real news. Reaching out over the campus and beyond. Training for real careers in the professional media, and half of them were just useless. First buried under the weight of classes, all the while trying to compile a historic documentary, then helping with the show, then being told to run the vid blog. It was enough to drive anyone mad, but these girls... The reporter hidden deep inside Kellark's soul was screaming. Alright, ladies. Lark refused to squirm, but hidden from view, Bree's hand moved down from a supportive pat on her shoulder to trace down her back. A lot further down. Starting this show, the Academy vlog is going to be more than event listings and puff pieces. We're covering the performers, the organisers. Gumbri? Gumbri! You have the interview set up with the head administrator? Bree's smile was innocent as the driven serf. I'm already on her schedule. I've got a whole hour with her. 2 days before the show. Good. Lark swallowed and crossed her arms. You ladies all have your assignments. We've got a show to cover, and when people get back from break, there's going to be a vlog worth watching. Jacksme sank into the chair, rubbing her eyes. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm not sure I can stay awake for a movie. Getting ready for the show has worn me out. So has the student vid blog. Lark nodded in commiseration. I'm finally getting things going, but goddess, some of those girls are hard work. We can give this week a miss, Malondi said, and Desi and Letzi nodded. The twins looked spent, so no one pressed. Belder was poking at her omnipad, while Nesfa and Pris were nowhere to be found. Scifi seemed as bouncy as ever, and Jax had to remind herself not to hate her. No one who spent all that time exercising should have that much spare energy. Do we have any business to talk about? Desi pulled out her omnipad, calling up her notes. I think everything's set. Once Lark and Letzi do the posters in the visitor center. No problem. Letzi was slouched on the break room floor and rolled over. They're printed. Putting them up will take about half an hour. The acts are as ready as they're going to be. They have their costumes too. Mara was handling that, and Jax nodded. The twins looked comatose. Those were quite a hit. Silk orders started coming in right after the girls began picking their outfits up. Desi flipped through a spreadsheet, and the faculty hasn't even gotten their gifts yet. Told you it wouldn't hurt to add the DataNet address. Jax was a picture of weary satisfaction. That just leaves any new business. Desi looked at the others, then back to Jaxme. Anyone? I was hoping there might be some material left over from the silks. Malondi spoke up. I asked Professor Warwick about, well, a gift for Vadim. He might... Hoots and whistles drowned out anything else for a moment, and she was burning blue by the time they cut it out. I don't know if he'll come yet, but I asked Professor Warwick, and he said a silk cravat might be nice. I'd like to get 2 as gifts for him and his father. I mean, we have all the scarves you could want, but maybe something for any husbands? That's a terrific idea. Jax was nodding with renewed enthusiasm. We did scarves because they'd be simple to run up in quantity, but I'll call the Tharios and ask if they can put together a few. What else? I was wondering, if things continue to sell, do you think we might be able to order some things from the next shipment from Earth? Mara stretched and her sister opened a curious eye. I mean, besides more chocolate. Maybe. If I can pay Uncle Jemsy back out of the first shipment and turn a profit. I don't think he'd mind a few requests, Jack said with a tentative nod. You have something in mind? Kind of, Mara nodded, brushing back her silver hair before biting her lip. Let me do some research, but I'd appreciate it. I've had my eye on a guitar. Not the same kind that's in the professor's exhibit, but sort of. We can do that. Jack Smear's smile grew larger. You know, if his exhibit goes on tour, I bet we can make a mint on collectibles, like those cube things. Do you hate people that much? Kellark asked dourly, shaking her head. They'd sell, but I wouldn't attach your name to those. That only leaves the calendar idea. Jack Smee rested her chin in the palm of her hand. Desi, do we have any leads on that? Well, Mel and I asked the professor about a market for calendars, but he just got that grin on his face and says something about Sports Illustrated and the Chippendales. Sports Illustrated? Sefit perked up. That sounds interesting. Is that diving? I asked, but he just turned that pink colour, you know? Desi shrugged. Anyway, we couldn't get anything out of him. So, what's a Chippendale? Jax looked around at the others. Desi was already poking at her omnipad. It says they're an illustrated cartoon duo of anthropomorphic chipmunks, small striped members of the rodent order, created in 1943? That can't be right, even if they're illustrated. Belder shrugged as she fished out her omnipad. Let me ask Liam. Nesfer? Pris leaned against the wall and hit the doorcome again. Nestha, I saw you go in. I know you're there. Would you please just talk to me? After a moment, the door cracked open, and Pris peered inside. Nesfer lay sprawled on her bed, tugging listlessly at her long black hair. Nesfer, are you all right? Pris closed the door behind her. "You look like you've been to the deeps and back." "I'm fine," Nessa grumbled. Pris sighed. "R'hllor talked to me. This is all my fault, really. I've just been doing my best to get ready for the midterm in bio, and I practically pushed him at you. I'm sorry, I didn't... What do you have to feel sorry for?" Nessa waved her off angrily. "I'm not a child, you know." "I know. And now I've heard what's been going on with Margaret, I just feel awful that I... Look, will you stop? I did this to myself. I was just trying to do the right thing, but I didn't even ask you. You're his sister, and I just barged right in. I was trying to help, and I'd do it again. But it's my fault. I mess things up. Me." Nessa rolled off the bed, her voice raw with hurt. "Would you please just leave me alone? I've embarrassed myself enough already. Please?" Pris let herself get half ushered and half pushed out, the door slamming behind her. Alone in the hall, she shook her head, still weary from the lack of sleep. "I have to deal with this. I'm the matriarch here. I have to handle this like one." Trudging back towards her room, she made herself stop thinking about exams. She had to figure out what a matriarch would do. "Well, we made it to Shell," Mavere said, holding Tom's hand as they sat beside the fire pit. "Only 1 week and we get a nice vacation." "I'm just glad I made it through talking to Dalala," Tom grimaced briefly. "But it was much too nice an evening. A vacation sounds perfect, though." He scrunched down in the deck chair, wondering who had made the fire pit outside the faculty dorms. It still seemed warm for a fire, but Mavere was drinking it in, and he closed his eyes, enjoying the serenity, as a gaggle of Prelfer hooted in the distance. "You said you wanted to talk to me about some things," Miv said after a moment. "Not yet. I still want to poker some ideas first," he said, giving her hand a squeeze. "Nothing bad?" "Nothing bad, I promise." Tom squeezed her hand longer and smiled. "Just something I want to mull over a little longer." Tom opened his eyes. Languid flames danced within the fire pit, playing and flickering on the apartment wall. The wood of some local tree created a pungent smell that was slightly sweet, and he drew a deep breath as the fire crackled and spat. It was so familiar. There, under a sky full of unfamiliar stars. A gust of wind blew past, whipping up the fire, and he felt Mavere shiver. "Blow, blow, thou winter wind," he murmured. "What's that?" she asked serenely. "Just murdering a bit of Shakespeare, one of our poets." "You know poetry? How does it go?" "Only 1 or 2, he smiled, as she canted her head and arched an eyebrow, daring him, and he shrugged. "Blow, blow, thou winter wind. Thou art not as unkind as a man's ingratitude, or Dalala's." "Tom," Miv growled, "thy tooth is not so keen, because thou art not seen, although thy breath be rude." "That's cute. I like it." She smiled and stretched in the chair. "I wish Leia was here with us." "That would be nice," he said, mulling that over. "So, what were you thinking about for our vacation? She has the time off, right?" "We have some thoughts." Miv closed her eyes and smiled enigmatically. "Good. So do I." He closed his eyes and could feel her sit up. "Goddess, you are such a tease." "It's only teasing if you don't follow through." His smile grew wider, and he kept his eyes closed. "Anyway, look who's talking." "And are you following through?" She rubbed her hand over his, and idly he wondered when her larger hands had come to feel so very normal, before deciding it didn't matter. "Promises, promises," she sniffed. "But yes, you usually do." Tom glanced over and watched her smile. A comfortable silence fell as they watched the fire crackle and pop. After a few minutes, he closed his eyes again, feeling at peace with the world. You're humming again, she murmured. Oh, just an oldie. He opened one eye, but there was a picture, as the orange glow of the fire played over her. What's it called, and what's it mean? She asked. Confess, Professor. Killer teaches it's good for the heart. I thought she's the goddess of healing. Same thing. So what is it? It's called the Year of the Cat, and I guess it means I'm feeling content. Tom settled back and held Miv's hand to keep her warm, pondering a whole week alone with her and Leah. Darcy was squared away, with a temporary job on campus for the week tending the exhibit, so her problems were solved, for now at least. It would be the perfect time to propose. Kamara sat back on her bed and pulled out her omnipad. Belda was probably still blushing, but at least they'd gotten her to put Liam on speaker to explain. Then the explanation made them all blush, hearing something like that from a man. Reactions have been mixed. Of course, Jacksme got them set up for the pictures. The idea of being half clad in a bikini and half out of a school uniform, or something suitable if the head administrator still couldn't be persuaded, and dancing was tasteful, wasn't it? Practically art, easy to market too. Kamara sighed. She wasn't sold on the notion, but it might be fun. Anyway, Jax had promised residual profits for everyone in the calendar. That might defray the cost of the guitar, and she'd need that and Jacksme's goodwill to have something sent, without it putting her into debt. Who knew how much a guitar could cost? Mara huffed and set that aside for later. She still had one thing to see to, but talking with FM was fun. Math Girl 1. Sorry for the late message, I have a ticket sorted. What name do I put it under? FM Forever. Thank you. Can you put it under Dorsculo? That was fast. Goddess. FM seemed to keep ours as bad as hers. Anyway, FM would only be 3 or 4 rows back and right in the center, since Dad and Mums are off planet right now, and Mara could give away the ticket. They've seen tons of her shows. Anyway, she and Lynn had got them scarves. The purple ones were just the best. Math Girl 1. It's a great seat. FM Forever. I really appreciate this. Would you have time to meet before the show, if that isn't awkward? I've heard the school has a wonderful music collection. Mara grinned. She'd seen that one coming a light year away. FM seemed like a nice girl, and she had an hour or two before the show. She could probably drag Caslin along to get her away from those council girls for a while. Everything would go fine. Math Girl 1. Don't be silly. We've been talking every day. Maybe at the visitor center around noon? Most families don't show up until 1. FM Forever. Sure, I'll be wearing white. White? Not house colors, but oh well. Some women just like standing out in the crowd. This was going to be fun. Vadim looked at his father hopefully. He loved the man, worshipped him almost, but honestly, sometimes his father could be such a drama prince. Dad, you've always told me that you want me to date. As long as you're sure you want to go. You were moping all over the place last week. I'm sure, really. I like her a lot. Vadim stewed. Goddess, this was just so embarrassing. Good. I wanted to be certain you've made up your mind. Dad nodded sharply, then sniffed. Honestly, son, I love you dearly, but sometimes you can be such a drama prince. Vadim gave an indignant huff, but maybe this time it was fair. He had been moping. I suppose. I'll treat her like our best customer ever. No. No. She's not just a customer. What's rule number 2? Always make the customer feel special. That's right. You're meeting this girl for a date. You need to make her feel beyond special. I cooked for her, Vadim said uncertainly. That was supposed to count for a lot. But that's here. What's our rule number 1? Vadim sighed. The kitchen is our empire. Everywhere else, never fail to be polite. Gentlemen and ladies, watch out, we have a winner coming through. Vadim grinned manically. My boy, we need to take you shopping. This will be unbelievable. I was going to wear my plum suit. What? No. She's seen you in that already. Vadim's head snapped back, scrutinizing him up and down. I'm thinking periwinkle. Periwinkle? Sure, it goes fabulous with green. Always look marvelous, and you can be marvelous. I suppose green is my favorite color. Vadim smiled a bit at that. It really did show off his eyes. Just remember to treat her right. What's our rule number 3? Never try to teach someone you like how to drive. That earned him a look as his father arched a paternal eyebrow, but Vadim grinned. Just kidding. Rule number 3 is always treat a woman like an empress. Dad, the girls from the academy are all nobility. You don't think she's too high to be seen with me, do you? I mean, later? Would you relax? We're Desaris. You're a noble too. Anyway, she has nice manners. His father gave him an exaggerated moo. She's probably 1 or 2 ranks higher at most. 3 tops. So, send her a message and tell her you accept. Don't be a tease. And stop worrying. You'll give yourself wrinkles. Anyway, if your evening goes well, you know what you have to do. I know, sir. She said her family's away, but I'll ask when you can meet her mothers. Melondi had just flopped down on her bed when her omnipad pinged. Groaning in exasperation, she reached for it, wondering who wanted something now. They'd only just split up, and after a hot shower she needed to sleep. Tucking it off the nightstand, she opened the app. Chef Vadim. I spoke with my father. He is delighted to come to the show. I'm looking forward to seeing you at the social after. Melondi stared at the text and kept herself from shivering in joy. A princess should not squeal. I have a date, she whispered, barely able to breathe. Kadira closed down her desk pad, settled back in her chair, and rested her chin on her hands. The lights were off and the evening sky draped in shadows, but the footage she'd watched was bright and alive in the palace of her memory. It had been ridiculously easy to obtain full surveillance on Princess Kalira, or Melondi, as she was going by. A simple request from Princess Kamordri to Central opened all doors. As eldest daughter, she was looking after the family in this time of Her Imperial Majesty's grief, and she wanted all information on family security, ready for review on her return. Given her former rank in the interior, it was a kind and loving gesture. Lamana Duvari and her team have been meticulous about sending updates to Central. Reviewing their reports made planning so very convenient. The video footage on all the targets had been commendably organized. Profiles, backgrounds, habits. Habits are a fatal flaw. Rigidity of thought leads to rigidity of action, which could conveniently turn into the rigidity of the grave. Even without a watchful opponent, the laws of the moment can change, rendering those laws irrelevant in the face of new circumstances. Those who can't adapt like water are begging to drown in complacency. The tape of Kalira's outburst had certainly proven interesting. It appeared there was greater depth to the girl than met the eye, and more of her mother in her than anyone suspected. It had been a fruitful day. Her meeting with Dr. Bradoon and Clips Cosreen had been less fulfilling than she'd hoped, insofar as finding another useful assassin, but it had been a positive boon to acquiring useful patses. Sooner or later, they proved their value. All things happened in their proper order. Never turn away a free tool. Rather than exhausting yourself, use other people to do the work, and further your own agenda, saving yourself valuable time, effort, and risk of exposure. Successful fools could be the most disposable of people. easily cast aside and forgotten while you take the credit. Lamana Duvari was ordering double shifts. It was proactive, well thought out, and predictable. Duvari was a solid representative of the interior at his very best. A top student, a true believer, grounded in her convictions, resolute and steadfast. Predictable, yet still possibly a problem. Kadira closed her eyes and mulled over the situation briefly, evaluating Camaudra's goals and her own. Everything seemed in place, but it wouldn't do to be overconfident. There was still time for her other contingency. How do you commit the perfect murder? Alone in her study, Arali Tejo, Marchioness and Admiral of the Purple, regarded the device resting on her bureau. Burnished to a dull blue-grey, the evil little weapon had a dull shine as it lay beneath the desk lamp. It was primitive, brutish even, human. How many like it had she seen? She had lost count. Over the last few weeks, her contact had carefully provided all the bona fides Arali needed to be satisfied, but now the pistol had arrived, a cold, uncaring proof of her contact's sincerity. The pistol itself was a simple mechanism. A contact-ignited slug thrower. There was no power pack, no advanced alloys, nothing to set off a common detection system. It was literally too antiquated to be anything but a relic. But while all such weapons looked alike, there was something odd about the device. It looked like a museum piece. The instructions for its use were as easy as the plan. Arriving in full service uniform to enjoy the performance, she would slip into the festival with a provided ticket. Her benefactor's target was expected to be at the museum collection, around an hour before 2 p.m. when the celebrations began, and their target would be in the company of the human, Thomas Warwick. Any surveillance would be taken care of, as long as she was in position in the correct window of time. Everything after that was simple. Kill the target and any other witness with the pistol. The 9 rounds should be more than adequate. After that, kill the little human with the ceremonial dagger worn with her uniform and place the gun in his hand. Tejo was no fool. The time frame could be off. Warwick might not show just when he was supposed to. How many things could go wrong? Still, if he didn't arrive, she could slip back to the performance. No one the wiser. Hands clean. Succeed, and everything she wanted would be hers once more. Public acclaim and imperial favor. Amal Arali Tejo, one of the bold liberators of Earth. A heroic survivor in the face of the worst human treachery, who'd faced down perils including being buried alive. Now that noble heroine would stop a crazed human from killing countless other young women with his primitive weapon, in a savage, premeditated act of terror. The story would return her former glory, even burnish it to greater heights. There was also the threat, unspoken yet no less real. Fail, and the darkest deeps wouldn't be enough to provide her sanctuary. Thomas Warwick had taken her life of privilege and prestige, and remade her into a laughingstock, a party joke, decimated her reputation. Now he would be the key to her restoration. She would get it all back, everything she deserved, the way it used to be, and more. Ruin his name, burn his reputation, forever. Bury him.